EWA 517, do you want to report a UFO? Over.
Negative. We don't want to report.
Aries 31, do you wish to report a UFO? Over.
Negative. We want to report one of those either.
Aries 31, do you wish to file a report of any kind? Over.
I wouldn't know what kind of report to file, sir.
Aries 31, me neither.
071 Papa Golf, go ahead.
If there was anybody above us that passed us like 30 seconds ago.
071 Papa Golf, negative.
Okay. Something. A UFO. Yeah. It's murdered 1095. Yeah, something just passed over us. Like don't know what it was, but it's at least 2,000-3,000 feet above us. Yeah, it passed right over the top of us.
911, you guys busy? We just called about the UFOs this time. Mm-hmm. They're out there, taking airplanes.
County Dispatch.
Okay.
Bob, I swear to God, 4 calls in on an unidentified object over Liberty.
4 calls.
4 calls on an unidentified flying object.
All right, now take a look. All right, we'll check it out.
Welcome to UFO Chronicles, a place where people share their experiences of the strange and unexplained. If you've had an encounter and would like to be on the show, you can email me at ufochronicles@gmail.com.
Hello everyone and welcome to the show wherever in the world you are listening from. How are you all? I'm Nick Hunter and this is UFO Chronicles Podcast. We start off today with Francesca in the UK and her strange encounter with a sighting of a UFO followed by a meeting with a strange man. Then remaining in the UK, we meet Pastor David Parry. He is a self-confessed experiencer who has interacted with both the supernatural and the paranormal since being a child. He saw a physical silvery disc in the sky while at school with the other children on the schoolyard. But his greatest interaction with realms beyond was in the summer of 1976, through repeated encounters with balls of light in various colours, who he believes were trying to enrich his horizons. If you enjoy listening to the podcast and would like to help support my work, there is a couple of ways to do this. Either you can join Patreon and become a patron of the show for as little as $5 a month, or you can donate via PayPal. And if you like, you can set up monthly reoccurring payments. All links to support the podcast are below in the show notes and on the website. Any help is extremely appreciated, and it helps the show to continue running. Now, on with the show. Hello, Francesca, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me.
You're more than welcome. You're calling from Kent in the United Kingdom.
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
On a fine, sunny Easter weekend.
Yes, lovely.
Now, you're going to be sharing an unusual encounter you had on the way to work one morning. Would you like to start at the very beginning, please, Francesca?
Yeah, sure. It was rather peculiar, and I must admit it's been bugging me ever since. So it was the 5th of August last year, which I believe was a Tuesday, and I was walking to work as usual, and it was, I think, like today, a very nice and clear sunny day, and it was probably about, I guess, between 8:30 and 8:45, and the route that I take to work, it sort of goes out. I was trying to explain the area because otherwise it's a little bit confusing, but it's I walk down past a car park, and then in front of me is like a little wooded area which backs onto the railway line, and it's very sort of uneven ground, and there's nothing really there. It's just sort of unused land, I guess, with trees. And then as I walk, so I sort of cut through that into another car park, and then I walk through the car park, if that makes sense. So as I was walking past the first car park down towards the trees, there was absolutely no one around, which is quite unusual because I would say when I'm walking to work, usually there's a fair few people that I would normally pass. but it might have been during one of the lockdowns. I can't really remember now. So I suppose that could explain it. But so as I was walking along, I saw this, the only way I can describe it is it was like a triangular flying object of some sort. I want to say maybe, it's hard to say because of the distance away I was from it, and that I'm not very good at sort of guessing how large it was, but I would estimate maybe between 2 and 2.5 meters across, possibly slightly larger, I'm not sure. But it was completely black. It almost looked like a, people when they do paragliding, so it's sort of like a triangular shape coming down out of nowhere, really. I can't say I knew how it got there, and it went down into the trees, and then just sort of I lost sight of it. And when I saw it, I just stopped in my tracks because I was so, it took me so off guard. I take that route to work every day, and it's just, I never expected to see anything quite that strange when I was walking. But underneath the black, underneath the sort of triangular part of it, it looked like there was something hanging underneath, like the only way I can describe it is like a duffel bag kind of shape, that kind of shape, but I guess solid. And that would have gone from like the tip of the triangle to the bag. But yeah, it sort of went down, came out of nowhere, went down behind it, sort of into the trees. And then I lost sight of it. And I didn't really know what to do. As I said, the ground there was quite uneven, quite rugged. And I just sort of thought, well, I'm in my work clothes. I can't really just take a trip down there. And it's technically private property, I think. So I decided to give it a miss. I was just so surprised. I thought, okay, maybe it's not a good idea to go down there. Let's just continue. So I took my normal route, went round, and obviously I was still trying to keep a lookout for it as I walked past, but I couldn't see it anymore. I couldn't see sort of where it had landed, if it had landed, or whether it had just swooped low and gone back off somewhere, I don't know. And as I cut through the trees and started walking through the second car park, I noticed that a man on a bicycle was cycling towards me. And normally I would say that the car park is fairly busy, but on this occasion it was quite empty, which is fairly unusual, I suppose. As he was cycling towards me, I had this moment where I thought so clearly in my head, I thought, he needs to ask me for directions. And so I stopped, and he slowed down and stopped next to me. And I looked at him and asked him if he was all right. And I was just absolutely so certain that he needed to ask me for directions, but he didn't say a single word to me. He just grinned at me the whole time and didn't say a single word. And so I was standing there staring at this man, and he looked quite unusual. He was extremely tall and very pale, and he had quite sort of, I guess, like very pale eyes. And he was dressed in this neon coloured, like, people who do professional sort of like biking, or they do it a lot, and they wear like the lycra sort of brightly coloured cycle gear. And it was just most peculiar because I have to say, people obviously cycle wherever they want, but I can't say I would imagine that somebody cycling for a specific reason in that sort of outfit would ever have decided to take a shortcut through the car park. But so yeah, we're staring at each other. He's just grinning at me. And I thought, okay, this is getting weird now. So I just asked him, are you okay? And he just kept grinning at me. And I started to get a bit nervous at this point because it was only then that I really thought to myself, I'm standing alone in a car park with this man who is not speaking to me. So, which I suppose seems quite ridiculous. But so I thought, okay, well, if he's not going to speak to me, he obviously doesn't need to ask for directions. I'm going to leave. So at this point, I felt a little bit unsafe. So I started to walk away. As I started to walk away, he started to cycle around me on his bike. So I then walked away very quickly. And as I got to the edge of the car park, I turned around and he had gone. He was no longer there. I just wanted to check that he wasn't following me, but he was gone. But it was just a combination of seeing the strange sort of flying object coming down out of the sky and then immediately bumping into that man, and his just general behavior and demeanor just felt very strange, and it has been sort of bothering me ever since. I thought to myself it could have been some sort of drone. So I was looking up different types of drones and talking to my husband, who's more familiar with sort of drones and things like that. But I couldn't see that it really, I mean, I don't think any drones are really that big. I can't see why, when I think about where it came from, just out of nowhere, and it sort of just disappeared into the trees. And I thought something of that size, I'm not sure how that could have happened. And then the band seemingly came out of nowhere. But yeah, so that is basically what I saw. And it was only then that I thought to myself, I really need to know what this is. So I was sort of out there sort of doing a bit of minor research on whether anybody else has seen anything similar, and I sort of just fell down a rabbit hole, and that is actually how I found your podcast.
Yeah, it's usually how people find it, down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. So yeah, I thought I would just reach out and see if, I don't know, anybody else had heard anything similar, or if you'd heard anything particularly similar.
I mean, coupled with the strange object you saw quite early in the morning.
Yeah.
And followed by the strange individual. A lot of people have strange encounters. I've just edited one now, and this guy had a strange encounter with this couple, which didn't seem right. I mean, of course, we're going to meet nutters here and there, but sometimes you meet people and there's just something different about them.
Yeah, it was just the fact that as he was cycling towards me, I had it was like imprinted in my mind that he needed to ask me for directions. I don't know why I thought that. Because, you come across, I walk past many people normally on the way to work, and I never have ever stopped and thought, oh, that particular person needs to ask me for directions. And then he didn't say a single word to me. It was most peculiar.
Didn't say a word and just looked at you, grinning.
Yeah, he was grinning the whole time. It was, yeah. I mean, really, when I think back on it, if it was nighttime, it would have been quite frightening. But I suppose as it was quite early in the morning, and I was probably still quite sleepy.
And is it a route you usually take?
Yeah. And in fact, I got to work, and I said to my colleagues, I said, I've just had the strangest experience. And I briefly explained it, and they were like, that is weird. And they suggested, and my husband said the same, that I don't take that route to work anymore, or I switch it up just in case it was, I don't know, some person that actually was following me or something like that. But I felt compelled to continue to walk that route because I just felt like I needed to meet him again. I don't know why. I just felt completely compelled. I thought, I really wish that I could meet that guy again because I need to ask him who he is and where he came from. But no, I haven't seen him since.
Never seen him since. Unusual. No. That's a strange one.
It is, yeah. Although I suppose he could have been a completely normal person, and perhaps he thought I was strange. Who knows?
It's normal to say something, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it was very strange.
He saw you had stopped, so if he stopped, surely, he would have asked you, are you okay?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. I really thought he was going to say something to me. But it was just the fact that he was grinning the whole time. And I thought, is somebody playing a prank on me?
Even if he didn't speak English, he would have gestured something,
Yeah, or sort of said, I don't speak English or something like that. Yeah. And I think normally when you see, I sort of thought maybe if he was professionally cycling somewhere for some reason, maybe there would have been more, he would have been with more people, or I would have seen more cyclists, because, sometimes you do see that sort of a group of people together. But it was just the fact that there was absolutely no one else around just seemed really strange to me. Because as I said, normally there are quite a few people that I would walk past on the way to work, even throughout sort of the different lockdowns that we've had. It's just been bothering me since. I feel like I need to know not only who the man was, but what the flying object was that I saw. And I really wish that I'd gone down to look for it. But unfortunately, something told me not to. So I just didn't.
So the object, it was, what, 2.5 meters?
I think so, although I'm generally quite bad at sort of approximating measurements. But yeah, I would say it had to be at least 2.5 meters, possibly.
Okay, so about 6.5, 7 foot, something like that. The area, it was just a wooded area. Was it hilly? Is it hilly all around that area?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, it's a very small sort of wooded area. It's sort of it dips down, so it's almost sort of a hill downwards, and the land is very sort of uneven, and it borders on the railway line, and then behind the railway line, I think, is more trees. So I almost saw it come down, past those back trees, and then into the trees that were sort of in front of me, and then it sort of just vanished. And I thought something of that size would be unlikely. It would be unlikely that it would not be visible from the pavement, because it's not sort of like a huge wooded area. It's just sort of unused land, I think.
Interesting. I mean, I actually saw a paraglider a couple of hours ago from my garden when I was out there, and they're quite distinctive. You see a paraglider, you kind of realise, especially if you've seen them before.
Because I think, when I first saw it, I think I had this thought in my head, and I was trying to work out what it was as I stopped and stared at it, and I thought the two things I thought were it could have been a drone, and then I thought no, it's a bit too big, I think, and then I thought, could that be a paraglider? And I was looking to see if there was a person underneath, and obviously, as I said, there was sort of a black oblong-ish shape underneath, but it was solid, and I thought, okay, so that's not a person. But I suppose there is a chance it could have been a person, but.
And have you Googled around your area, specifically around your area, to see if anybody had any, other strange occurrences along that path?
Yeah, no, I did sort of have a bit of a Google, but it's hard to know what to search sometimes, isn't it? And a lot of the things that I found were sort of just from the Kent area in general, not sort of local to where I was. So yeah, I don't think there wasn't anything that I could see that was sort of a similar.
That's a strange one.
It certainly was, yeah.
See, the one I'm releasing on Sunday is this guy, and at the time he lived in a little town where everyone knew each other. And he was saying he was out of his friends at a bar, and this couple came in, and this couple, he said they were, very strange looking, and they were wearing this kind of 70s gear. And he said they didn't live in the town because, everyone knew everyone in this town. And, America's like small town America.
Yeah.
And he's saying they came over to speak to him, and he chatted to him for a while. And then from that bar, all the group decided to go back to someone's backyard to have a few beers. And they came to, and they were talking to him, and they said, "We're not from around here. We're from outer space." But now and again, you will hear people that have had these encounters with people. And like I said, you're always going to meet nutters in the street. That's normal. But sometimes you meet people which are not quite right or do not quite belong.
Yeah, it's just a weird, when you sort of just look at someone and you think something doesn't add up here. It was the whole, as you said, like with the last person you spoke to, the fact that they were sort of like dressed in complete 70s gear. It's like I'm looking at this man in this like neon, different coloured sort of lycra situation. And just thinking something about him just was not just not normal. It's odd to explain.
And this is probably going to bug you now.
It is, yeah. And I just really wish that, when I was sort of Googling initially, I was thinking to myself, eventually I'm going to come across something and I'll know, somebody will have had the same experience or a similar thing happen, and I'll say, okay, yeah, that is it. Or perhaps I'll find a drone that looks exactly like what I saw, and that will answer the question. But I don't think that's going to happen somehow.
So to our listeners out there, if you've had a strange encounter with someone on a path around the Kent area, get in contact. I'm sure Francesca would like to know she's not the only one.
Yes, please.
Wonderful. Okay.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay. Enjoy your weekend now.
And you.
Take care of yourself.
You too. Bye.
The Fortean Film Festival is a new celebration of cinema, created by people who have a passion for all things weird and paranormal. The current season is now open for submissions. Get involved if you're a filmmaker that has a penchant for poltergeists and adores aliens. Or if you're a producer devoted to demonology with a soft spot for sci-fi. The deadline for submissions to this IMDb-approved festival is fast approaching. Go to www.forteanfilmfestival.com to submit your film or buy tickets, if you dare.
Welcome to the show, Pastor Parry.
It's a huge pleasure and a deep honour, Nick, to be on your show. I admire your work no end, and it's a necessary and educative service that you're giving to anyone. So to everyone, to anyone and everyone. I'm very, very grateful to be one of your guests.
Wonderful. It is my pleasure. And you're calling from London in the UK.
For my sins, of which I'm sure there are very many, I currently live in London in the UK. Yeah, on election night, for local elections, of course, with people prowling up and down this road trying to change my mind. I've already voted. Ha, 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 ha. So it's a bit late for that. But yeah, hailing in South London for the time being.
Now, Pastor Parry, you have interacted with both supernatural and the paranormal since you were a child. Would you be so kind as to let the listeners know a little bit about yourself, if you like, and a little bit about your experiences?
Wow. In other words, right, I'm going to break one of the rules with which we discussed a minute ago and explain the three types of Catholic. There are three types of official Catholic: Roman Catholic, Alexandrian Catholic, and Antiochian Catholic, coming from the old ancient city of Antioch, the Syrians. They're all official. They all developed roughly at the same time. And as I said to you earlier, if I go to Rome, they call me father. So there's no argument about being speech marks official Catholic, but obviously we're very small in this country. So I'm a very proud non-Roman Catholic, but Catholic pastor. I'm the founding pastor of St. Valentine's Hall, which is an openly LGBTQI+ chapel of worship in Balham in South London. I'm a poet. I have a reasonably well-developed reputation as a British poet. I'm very honoured to be part of that tradition, that stream. I also dip into theatre every now and again. It's one of my great passions. And I can honestly, hand on heart, say, as a clergyman, I'm a serial experiencer for both supernatural and paranormal modalities of experience, most of which I haven't talked about until recently, because two things, there are only so many hours in the day. I mean, I don't think your punter, with deep love and respect, realises what the life of a clergyman is like. You're lucky to get 6 hours sleep. So there isn't time. And also, I haven't really found many suitable outlets, but the moment I was connected with this show, I thought, yes, that's a must. Let's give it a go and let's explore some interesting themes.
Wonderful. Okay, so your first experience, when did it begin when you were a child?
Wow. I make a very strong distinction between supernatural and paranormal. I mean, I think the key is in the words itself. I mean, technically, oh my God, I'm going to get theological on you for a minute, Nick. I mean, technically, there's only one supernatural thing, and that is God, above and beyond every single world system. So technically, that's the only supernatural thing. But I mean, people, in modern discussion, the way the word is used nowadays, they do talk about the supernatural. They tend to, link things like ghosts, apparitions, angels, demons with those realms. I suppose, the language is changing slowly, and now they say other dimensions. But I mean, traditionally, you'd have just said the supernatural realms, as opposed to the paranormal realms. I mean, I remember reading Lyle Watson's remarkable book, Supernature, many, many years ago, and thinking this guy is onto something. The paranormal, an extra bit of the normal world, the world we experience with our five senses, which can probably be extended into a couple of extra senses, but it's still a part of our world. You're not talking about other dimensions and so on. I suppose, one of the interesting themes is that my spiritualism has run in my family for at least 3 generations. I don't know how formally that was, but, you get the odd aunt turning up at Christmas having had an attack of the vapors with a local medium. Or missus, do you know what happened then? Which was always fascinating. I mean, certainly for me, I think it's been part and parcel of my life forever. But certainly the main ones I suppose I can kick off with, for want of a better phrase, is my first silvery disc UFO experience when I was at school, which taught me so much about this world as opposed to any other world. I was a young cub at a country school. I grew up in Fareham in Hampshire, which is a beautiful, idyllic, leafy, or at least it was then, part of the world to grow up in. A little rural paradise, not much going on, although, of course, it's between the cities of Portsmouth and Southampton. Now, that's important because, of course, Portsmouth has a major naval dockyard, so there are links with the heavy artillery of our services, and the late Navy in particular, which of course in Britain has a reputation for unusual engineering and interest in the paranormal. People tend to forget that it's not the army here. It tends to be the Navy. Don't know why. I'm sure there are people out there that know much more than me, but I have noticed that during the years. Anyway, we were all in the playground, primary school, on the verge of secondary school. I went to secondary school slightly late because it was a tiny village school. One of the teachers was sick. So, they didn't want people rushing between, not like the military regimes nowadays. They didn't want people rushing. And it was during my swan song in late primary school. We all saw it. This perfect, beautiful, gliding, silent, silvery disc way above us in the sky. It didn't make a sound. It was devastatingly beautiful. That was my first reaction, and that's my abiding reaction to this day. Everyone in the schoolyard saw it. The reaction amongst the kids, my heavens, these things show so much about human nature. Some ran off and hid, the cowards. Others started arguing. Isn't that weird? I, for one, was sort of, just agog at this little marvel floating above us, way above us, but floating above us in the air. I, with a few of the more robust kids, went into the teacher's common room. It was their tea break, and was saying things like, "By the way, miss, there's a UFO floating over the playground." We were told to go away. Don't be silly. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, really? Well, we can talk about it in class. They wouldn't come out. Yes, I know it's their tea break, but if a little miracle breaks out, you don't just ignore it and get on with your cup of tea. They wouldn't come out. The thing floated away. We went back into our classrooms when, of course, the prefect came out ringing a bell. Oh, my God, that dates me, doesn't it? Ringing a bell, and we all went back into our classrooms, and the first thing the teacher said is, "We want no talk of UFOs and all of that." So I lost my faith in British education that day. I've done rather well at it since, but that's no thanks to them. And it showed me not only what human nature is like to my young, sensitive mind, but also what open, discussion is in this country. In other words, there isn't any. And, it's to do with one's prejudices. You either accept an ideology or you don't. So you've given up the sort of Greek ideal of research and truth in science, which is ridiculous. So that was my impression of the silvery disc. Do I know it was real? Do I know it was some sort of mechanism? Yes to both counts. And that's my experience, I suppose, of the glittering paranormal at a very early age. I never forgot it, or people's reactions to it.
Several other school friends all saw it. What kind of size would you have said this disc was? Roughly.
Gosh, I'd say the size, and I'm guessing because it was a long time ago and I'm absolute crap at that sort of thing. I'd say it was the size of about 2 London buses. And it wasn't just a couple of my friends. Absolutely everybody in the schoolyard saw it.
The whole schoolyard, apart from the teachers.
Well, they wouldn't come out and look. I've never forgotten that. They just refused point blank to come out and look. It was their tea break. How often does that happen during somebody's tea break? Oh, why not be a revolutionary and bring a mug of tea with you? But they just refuse point blank.
Just put it down to children and their flights of fantasy.
Yeah. So, when the skeptical mob are always, reacting to these shows with actually some quite specious arguments sometimes, I just sit there grinning. Right, I'm sorry you haven't had the experience. I have, and I know what it's like. I'm not saying I know what it was, because in those days I wouldn't have made a connection with, unusual technologies. That was a craft of some sort. So I'll be talking about non-craft, very, very different phenomena in a moment. But it was a craft. It was a vehicle of some sort. I wouldn't have made the connection, obviously, because I was a kid, with something like experimental naval technology, which can't be ruled out, or something Jungian, weird archetypes trying to take place in this world, trying to manifest in this world. It was all too young. I was too young. But no, I mean, these things happen, and they happen on a regular basis. And I really think it's time our debate, not only within these circles but outside these circles, started to mature a little more. Whether they're classed as aerial phenomenon by the Americans or just plain old UFOs, it's time to admit, yes, something is happening, something incredibly interesting, and debate like adults, because it affects every one of us, since it's true.
It does, yeah. And you're just one of many people which have had these experiences. And, so many people don't come forward and don't share it.
Yeah. I can understand why, I suppose. People have busy lives, and look at the reactions that most experiencers get, unless they want to make a career out of it, or they're stalwarts. This happened to me and I'm proud of that. But no, that's why I think it's time for the entire debate to mature. I think we all know at the back of our minds now, at the very least, something is going on. But since it is such a universal and constant phenomena, we really need to be adults and start asking some really tough questions, like what is this and how does it impact us? Is it for good? Is it for ill? And remember, there are stories for good and ill with this particular phenomena. I remember going off at a slight tangent. Oh, what was it? The guy that played Jacques Vallée, that was it. I can't remember, Agents of Deception. I mean, he was employed by NASA as a scholar, of course, to look into this phenomena many, many years ago. And he came out with some incredibly worrisome ideas that, these phenomena, which is probably leading me into the next piece of our discussion, these phenomena can't really be said to be uniformly good. And, the way they interact with people at times is on the verge of the demonic. And certainly, I'm not saying that's my attitude. I have a much more complex attitude than that. But, the way when people are taken onto these physical vehicles, if physical is the correct word. I mean, they're making let's put ourselves on an alien spacecraft for a moment. They're making a real cock-up of this survey. I mean, let's send them a couple of textbooks from any decent university library. This is what the world is like. This is how a human being's configured. This is our physiology. These are our blood groups. So it can't be that. That survey for any technologically advanced civilization would have been concluded years ago. Yeah, and also, if you look at what human technologists are saying now, they could have basically machines the size of a grape floating around and collecting blood samples based on this new drone technology. So why are these aliens interacting with us, if that's what they are, in this bizarre way, which to me begins to sound more like a ritual than an actual sort of experimental encounter? But as I say, those aren't completely my thoughts. I'm just aware that they're there. And that's maybe another reason why we need to grow up and say, okay, how is this phenomena impacting us? And is it for our good as human beings? Well, this is where I get more pastory, I suppose, more of a pastor. I'm very honoured to be a Catholic pastor. I'm a priest that actually works as a pastor. I mean, that's why people tend to very kindly say pastor. I know some people in my own church that would like me to just shut up about all this, but I don't think we can. I think we're duty-bound as honest human beings looking for the truth. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free, as it says in the Gospel of John. If any true words were ever said, I don't know when they were, because that is what we've got to keep in mind. I would say that my experiences of the supernatural realm way outbalances and outnumbers my experience of unusual technologies and the paranormal realms. I'll take 1 year when I proved my spurs. I got my spurs as an experiencer. So as I say, if I look back, it was the life-changing summer of 1976, which caught my attention as an interactor with those realms, as someone getting responses from and reacting to those realms. It started, I used to live in the part of Fareham in Hampshire, in the sort of, my parents' home, which was Fareham on the verge of Titchfield, this idyllic little medieval village that had largely kept its form. So, very leafy, lots of back lanes, lots of lots of rustling in the trees and that sort of stuff. Seeing the starscapes in the evening was amazing because there wasn't that much light pollution. And I used to have the drear task of walking my mother's dog. Why didn't she ever ask me if I wanted to? But that's an old gripe from many years ago. Maybe I didn't, Mum, if you're listening from wherever you are now. And sort of, there was a lane called Fisher's Lane, which was this beautiful little lane going down from Fareham, leading you into Titchfield and the spectacular ruins of Titchfield Abbey, close to a pub, the Fisherman's Rest, which I frequented as a teenager with a healthy thirst later on. And that was, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful settings. I was walking early summer with the dog, with my mother's dog, and suddenly had the need to look upwards. There was no explanation whatsoever. I did it involuntarily and instinctively. I've never known to this day what prompted me to look up, but I knew no matter what, I had to look directly above me into the air. What did I see? Two balls of orange light attached to each other in an adjacent fashion, literally plummeting towards me at an unbelievable speed. And it was so real and felt so physical, although, of course, it wasn't. And we're dealing with, I think, very different types of entity, that I didn't know what to do. I'm stood on the spot. Do I run? Do I stand still? What do I do? They made a U-turn, I'd say a couple of 100 feet above my head, and shot back up into the sky and then disappeared. It shook me very, very much. I told my parents when I got home, I think, yes, late night in the evening in a Hampshire home. I don't think people are very interested in these things. They took it as one of those things. I don't know what that's meant to mean, but I think that's very British. It shook me to the core, as I say, because it was completely out of the blue and it wasn't of this realm, and I could sense that. I could sense these were the activities of spirits, of plasma beings. I'm not too sure those things are so distinct. Literally entities from elsewhere. And that marked literally weeks of intense activity with balls of light of various colours and various descriptions nearly every night for months. It was nearly the whole summer. Sometimes they'd be a breathtaking white colour, slight bluish tinge sometimes at the edges, but blue. I think that was the main colour looking back through. We keep with those ones, I think. I'll tell you one experience that certainly stuck with me through all these years. I was getting to the stage of working with them, and I knew they were interacting with me, and they were interested in what my reactions were and wanted me to communicate with them. So I said in my mind, how do I know that you're not just some sort of projection, you're not some sort of fantasy, you're something about my own mind and my own circumstances that I really don't understand at the moment? Why don't you prove to me for once that you're there? And something absolutely extraordinary happened. I'd say it was about 50 feet above my head. This ball of light shot down the road in front of me, leaving a trail like a comet. At the very end of the comet, there were a number of colours, including orange and amber. But the ball of light itself, sparkling white, glorious, pure, radiant light, shot down the road in front of me. Now, you've got to remember this is a market town, and in those days they didn't have streetlights everywhere, and we lived in that part of Fareham that wasn't, given to many streetlights and investment by the local council. What I didn't know, I knew there were trees down the road some way in front of me. I didn't know there was a courting couple hidden in the trees because it was just too dark and it was too far away. I remember the young girl to this day shouting out, "What the was that?" And then it disappeared. It had answered me and it had disappeared. I suppose I'll move on to the last experience of that particular group. My whole feeling was of something angelic, something above, something beyond, something advanced, something enlightening. I had absolutely no feeling that anything bad was happening. What did the silvery disc do for me? I mean, it left me quite neutral. Oh God, what was that? Be interesting to find out. Whereas this did not leave me neutral. These interactions I found stretching, I found inspiring. I always tend to know a genuine experiencer because, one never knows what to do with these experiences apart from come on wonderful shows like this. But the last one, and I knew it was the last one, it was almost telling me it was the last one. Late evening, late summer, late evening. The sun was still in the sky, so I could see one of these silvery balls sort of approaching me, but having lost the need to get too close, it suddenly generated, it started floating upwards. It suddenly started generating around itself a series of colours. Do you know, I wish I'd written it down, Nick. I wish I'd written it down. It wasn't Roy G. Biv. It wasn't the colours of the spectrum as we know it, red, orange, yellow. It was a different sequence. It floated upwards. It generated these colours around itself and then was gone. And my initial thought was, oh, my heavens, if I'd have seen that back in the days of the Vikings, I'd have said I'd just seen an Asgardian. I'd just seen someone from Valhalla climbing up the Rainbow Bridge. And what is the Rainbow Bridge? Of course, the higher levels of vibration. It was increasing its levels of vibration to go back to where it came from. Obviously, a much, what's this modern New Age talk? A much higher density than the one we're on. And it had to prepare itself to do that and start, vibrating at a much higher rate. I knew there and then that was the end of that particular cycle of events. I've only ever had one dark experience, an experience of the darkness, which sort of, I don't know what that says about me. I hope that says something good. Which had happened slightly before the last ball of light. I mean, I was again walking down Fisher's Hill with my mother's dog, which was my want. I'd say less than a week before this had happened. And I don't know, again, seeing above the trees, for me, it was always, look to the skies, look to the skies. That was the constant theme running through all of my encounters in those days. And something like a gap in space. Now, obviously, it wasn't a gap in space. It looked like a negative within a negative. I could suddenly sense above the trees. It slowly took the form of a gigantic bat, and I mean about 20 to 30 foot, so not a bat, a different sort of bat. It started struggling with these, look-alike wings to try and fly a bit higher. Weird stuff. Instinctively, I knew it was bad, and I disliked it. Instinctively, I got the feeling back that it was bad and it disliked me. And it just couldn't really raise the necessary level of energy and momentum to do anything and literally faded away into the night sky. Curiously, I mean, I mentioned it that way around because I knew the balls of light experiences were coming to an end at that point. And of course, about a week later, I see whatever the entity was, the spirit climbing the Rainbow Bridge back to the realms of glory. And that finished that particular summer of interactions with the realms beyond.
The summer of 76.
Life-changing, Nick. I've never, ever, ever forgotten the fact that it's constant when it wants to be. And you don't come away from these things the same person. You come away with a different attitude and a different mindset to the one you had before.
That's absolutely right, you don't. And you're interacting with them as well. So there was some form of communication between yourself and them.
Oh, I'll tell you something weird that I've only just started thinking again recently. It was almost as though they were trying to communicate with me. Don't you think it's just time to get on with it? Now, I've never quite known what that meant. The whole attitude was, you're meant to be doing something. Don't you think it's time you got on with it? Like gentle reminders all the time of something to be done. Who knows? Perhaps it's shows like this all these years later. But certainly that was the running theme. And as I say, my experiences mostly have been of light enlightenment and deeper consciousness, expanded consciousness and things like that.
Yeah, and it's something I hear quite a lot. When it comes to authors, musicians, artists, they have a very similar thing where they're kind of prompted and pushed in a certain direction.
Yeah, I think if you're in the service, for want of a much better description of creativity, there's an expectation, New Age vocabulary again, the universe wants something. It wants something given back to the universe, which I've always thought was true and always, tends to be a vital thing, an uplifting and energizing thing for everybody involved. I mean, I wonder, I've been thinking recently, if I'm completely honest with you, if these energy beings, these spirits, wanted to say to me, when you're a clergyman, you should be talking about these things. It's only in the last couple of weeks I've been thinking that. But now it's happening and I'm talking about them. It's not as though the Bible and other scriptures don't mention these things. Do I find it a threat to my faith? Of course I don't. These things are far too sketchy, and compared to a metaphysical system which has lasted thousands of years. No, of course I don't. But I do find it what are religions anyway? Fingers pointing at the moon. They're not these mysterious, numinous realities themselves, but they're pointing to it. And it was almost like these energy beings, these spirits were saying, when you're in those positions, when you're in that position, talk about these things, because that's what you're meant to be doing. Don't forget, if I was a shaman in Central Asia, a part of the world I'm deeply in love with, there would be absolutely nothing unusual talking about these incidents, these phenomena. It's only in this part of the world where, for reasons best known to the powers that be in the various churches, that they really don't want these things discussed. It's not a question of, can we smuggle it in or can we drag people into thinking it? I can tell everybody from my experience, they prefer nobody talked about it. It's upsetting the apple cart. I can't see why. But, the only people I can think of recently to come out, coming out of the supernatural, the supernaturalists and the paranormal closet, were people like the great evangelical thinker Chuck Missler, a remarkable human being who openly talks about UFOs, the fourth dimension, interactions with these beings, and what does it mean. And my personal friend, the Reverend Jim Wilhelmsen, who is another right-wing evangelical, so it's not true churchmen never agree, if they're across the spectrum. I'm a nice, cuddly Catholic liberal. I count him as a very close friend of mine, who wrote a book called Beyond Science Fiction, where he was a serial experiencer as a youth. And in his, not speaking for somebody else, you need to have him on your show, Nick. Not speaking for somebody else. It was when he started praying that these phenomena stopped. And years later, of course, he has a ministry in Roswell. So, there are weird synchronisms at work in all of this. But, ultimately, these are mysteries pointing at an even greater mystery.
Introducing the High Strangeness Coffee Blend by Redacted Coffee Company, a medium roast of the Brazilian kind. This medium roast offers flavours of chocolate and vanilla combined with a distinct fruity taste and a unique sweet floral aroma. The experience of High Strangeness doesn't end there, with a sweet butter aftertaste that doesn't fade as your coffee cools. This coffee regains its flavours all the way through your cup, ensuring it truly is good to the last drop. The veteran-funded, employee-owned Redacted Coffee Company and UFO Chronicles Podcast have partnered together to bring you the best coffee on and off the planet. Get 20% off your first order now at redactedcoffee.com/UFO. That's redactedcoffee.com/UFO. Or follow the link below in this episode's description or click on the banner of my website. This podcast is fueled by coffee oozing high strangeness. So what are you waiting for? Wake up to the strange. Do you think these experiences have kind of pushed you in a direction and, your position where you are now?
No, I think if you feel the call to vocation, it has to be from you personally. It's the way the ultimate, the absolute is interacting with you personally, the way the Christ energy is interacting with you. It can't be from anything else. I think certainly these phenomena open the mind. They open the minds of those who go through them. But no, for years, I didn't talk much about them for the very simple reason there are only 24 hours in the day, as I keep saying. Clergy are extremely busy people, and I tend to be, I've become a reasonably well-known LGBTQI plus activist. So most of the time I'm sort of chained to barricades of a very different type, knocking policemen's helmets off. Can you do that anymore? And, hell no, we won't go, and all that 70s stuff. Because, I preach the social gospel. I'm trying to do ridiculous things like get some social justice back into the church and society generally. So that's been my central thrust. And if you put that, on top of the fact there's a busy ministry to maintain, plus I write poetry, plus I perform it, that really takes most of the hours of the day. Certainly what it did do, I think, was give me a wry smile regarding the ideologically skeptical. Not only did it allow me to see more clearly that there is no state of evidence whatsoever that would convince them, because they don't want to be convinced. They've taken a different worldview upon themselves. Not absolutely everybody. There are scholars amongst the disbelievers as well, and I think they're open to arguments and discussions. I just noticed that's not the direction the so-called skeptics are going in the minute. It's a rival ideology, almost like the universities. I'm honoured to have 3 degrees. But I did notice during my time at university that they too were changing. And, now there's a credo, which is, materialism. practical materialism, and there's a priesthood, the lecturers, who defend that as the final point of reference to which nothing else can really be added. Reductive materialism, and okay, if that's what you want to do, that's fine by me. But don't say you're still searching for the truth, because you're not, because there's now an ideology in place. And certainly a lot of the skeptics I've heard nowadays simply, if an angel was stood in front of them and they themselves were glowing with light, they still wouldn't be able to see what was happening. But that's an ideological stance. That's not an open-minded stance. And, good on you if that's what you want, but maybe that's not an accurate description of the world. I mean, I notice in the skeptical camps, the camps of skepticism, that basically that's entrenching now. But, that's not scientific discovery. And it may give you, if you're sticking rigidly to reductive materialism as the only explanatory mechanism for us as human beings and our understanding of nature as human beings, well, yes, you've got a reasonably accurate view of most of our experience, but certainly not all of it. And it's accurate only in the sense that it's shallow and it's narrow. So what you've actually done is refused to look at all of the other stuff that can say, actually, maybe it's not that. So there's nearly a choice nowadays between a very narrow bandwidth, which people will look at, which is clear but really doesn't describe us as human beings at all the type of continuum we live in. Or there's the wider bandwidth when you're open to these experiences and it's less it's less convenient, it's much more messy, it's much more confusing, you won't get answers. Or at least the sorts of answers that can be clean cut and, pinned down. But that's a more accurate view of life, and it's a more accurate view of our anthropology as human beings. So it saddens me that that's happening. But as I say, these encounters have given me a wry smile and the ability to see when someone is opposing these phenomena for the simple reason that they just don't want to believe it happens.
Your dark experience was interesting.
Oh, gosh. I mean, do I have a Manichaean worldview? No, I'm a Catholic. I do think there is a struggle in the spiritual realms because Scripture tells me so. And also that was sort of, I don't know, some sort of weird verification of that. If all this light is happening and manifesting in somebody's life, I suppose there must be an intrusion by the other side, as it were. I tend to have an odd view. I mean, right, okay, what have all these experiences done for me? They've given me a strange view of life, that this world is something like a no man's land. This tiny world, this beautiful jewel in the hand of the Creator is something like a no man's land between two much bigger and much more powerful and much more removed realms, kingdoms, whatever. We're caught between two vast spheres, two vast worlds that we really don't understand. And it would take all of our evolution to be able to get to grips with, one of which is the world of light and the other of which is the world of darkness. Now, of course, this is hardly original from me. I mean, Dennis Wheatley, a man I admire. People, they always remember the occult novels, which is not actually what he was doing all the time. He was so posh. I bet he wrote more on wine tasting than he actually did on the supernatural. The man was involved in politics and espionage stories, and they didn't catch on. So everybody homes in on this sort of stuff, which I don't think pleased him. I mean, I have friends who knew people that knew him, one of those weird things. And I more or less certainly wasn't particularly happy with that. But, a Zoroastrianism, which of course is one of the streams in the desert religions, the original prophet Zoroaster or Zarathustra, who wrote a book called the Agathas, which is arguably the world's first holy book. It's a response to the Bronze Age warriors from India attacking what would later be Persia, and him basically saying, because they've suddenly got metal weapons, the first time in human history that we're aware of. And he's saying basically in this book, I mean, when I first came across the Agathas and started to read it, I had to put it down. It was nearly like reading a modern mind talking about modern issues. I mean, not talking about specific moral issues, but the outlook, the outlook of good, bad, right, wrong, yes, no, light, darkness. It was there, and I put it down. I didn't read it again for years because it was just too undermining. And oh my God, how old is that book? But he's the man that comes along and says, look, what you claim to worship must be bad, because look at the mayhem and carnage you're bringing into the world. So he talks about Ahura Mazda, the Prince of Light, and Angra Mainyu, the Prince of Darkness. And it's not an eternal battle. People get that wrong. When the created world comes into being, then it's a continual battle between those two principles, those two powers, until the end of time. But then those principles separate forever, and they never interact anymore. So, of course, that means, I suppose, in our modern vocabulary, the end of the earth, when the earth is no longer here. Certainly it's in Zoroastrianism, it's in the three great desert faiths. Judaism, people tend to underplay the fact without Judaism you don't get Christianity. And also Islam. I mean, we're all brothers, we're all cousins, we're all family. And that way of thinking runs through the three great desert religions as well. So, I'm not saying anything that's not in any of the scriptures of the great faiths that come from the desert. At the moment, I'm actually living in a haunted house. I'm living at my brother's place. There's a long story behind that, and the amount of psychic activity going on here is unbelievable. But that's a different issue, I suppose. Yeah, there are negative entities, there are positive entities, and the idea in the desert religions is you make a choice. Why are you here? You're here to make a choice between the light and the darkness. In the light, things thrive, they expand, they evolve, they become much more deeply what they were always designed to be. Whereas in the realms of darkness, things wither and they die, and there's little apart from servitude towards those powers and principalities that live therein. I it's nothing new for a clergyman to talk about those things, but certainly I suppose I feel very honoured that the dark hasn't, heavens, extra prayers needed this evening, the dark hasn't intruded into my experience too many times. And it's always been for me much more of a, you've got certain experiences, don't pull back, and, when the occasion arises to talk about them. So I suppose that was one of the reasons we got in touch with your good self in this show.
And you're also a speaker on the Nephilim?
Oh, that bloody conference. Right, I have the honour to be the founding producer for the Nephilim Anthropology Conference. Right, what have all these powers done? They've eventually led to this conference. I first came up with the idea in 2013 or thereabouts. My dear friend, the Estonian author Vladimir Wiedemann, thought that we hadn't put any projects on. I mean, I've directed and produced 9 well-received and major theatrical projects, plays. I've done 9, but, there was nothing happening at that particular time. So he thought we could do something avant-garde and amazing, different views of human history, which in those days was groundbreaking. I mean, we would have been the first, if we'd have gone ahead with it. It fell apart. I remember saying to Jim, who's a lifelong friend of mine, we're ordering tickets, we've ordered flights, you'll be staying in such and such accommodation. This will be incredible fun. And him saying to me something ominous, like the Nephilim don't like being discussed. They don't like being talked about. Be careful. And me thinking, but not saying to him because he's one of my mates, oh, shut up, Jim, all this evangelical gobbledygook. Within 2 weeks, the entire project had collapsed. The bank, for reasons best known to itself, withdrew our modest credit line. It never gave an explanation. And of course, that meant nothing could go ahead because nothing could be paid for. I went down and had a row with the business manager at the local branch, who assured me it would all be put back into place on time, and it wasn't. So never trust a bank. So the whole thing collapsed around us, our ears. Jim has the sort of rather, I don't know, for me it's a bit too clinical and it's a bit too tidy view that, the Nephilim, what people call demons nowadays are actually the Nephilim, which I'll explain a bit more in a minute, I suppose. So that fell apart, and it was basically people talking me into reviving that idea last year. So it was during one of the lockdowns that we had a trial run. We put on a completely virtual Nephilim Anthropology Conference, Part 1. We got a very good turnout, a glittering panel. We're forming a panel of speakers. So all I do is produce. I deliver a lecture at the beginning, to set the scene of what we're doing, we've a wide range of views. Some have supernaturalist views, some have very anthropological views. I mean, certainly Vladimir Wiedemann was involved in Moscow State University back during the days of the Cold War, was talking about different types of human being at the beginning of time. Nobody was talking about it then, and the Americans were poo-pooing that. There are very sizable human beings, there are tiny human beings. They're all human, and they believed at that time, Moscow State believed at that time, that they had evidence for that. None of it came over here because it was the Cold War, and both sides wouldn't pay for funding, usually. Vladimir Wiedemann was a part of all of that. So we have actually quite solid scholarship looking at evidence and artifacts for different types of human beings. We've that side of it. We've the paranormal side of it. We've the UFO side of it. We've the supernaturalist side of it. And as I say, we're forming a permanent panel. The trial run was very successful. We held the second interactive hybrid leg. So in other words, there were people that could follow us online, and there were people that actually turned up to our actual first physical staging at the Royal Asiatic Society. I have the honour of being a fellow there, so they did us proud. Endless coffees and biscuits all day, they did us proud. And so that's, I suppose, the two events last year. We're also holding our third event, which for me will be the first real one, because, we've tried and tested all of the problems, all of the stops, and we know what works now, what doesn't work now. This coming October, the 29th and the 30th, at David Game College in London, and we've got really a group of unparalleled experts, all of which are sharing their own research and their own knowledge into this subject, with the view of collaboration, not point scoring. What does it all mean? Now, I confess that's my idea. What are the Nephilim for me? They're a biblical mystery. To go further than that, I think you need to be very brave. Jim goes a lot further than that. But, it goes back to Scripture, the Gospels, where the apostles ask our good Lord, how do we know that the end will arrive? What will be the signs? And he does say, our good Lord says something very odd, as in the days of Noah. Well, that's actually a very strange thing if you look back to what Genesis says about the days of Noah. If you go back to Genesis 6 in the Bible, there are places you can find UFOs in the Bible. I do not agree with Von Daniken that it's every single unusual description. The Bible is not a badly written history book, and it's not a third-rate technical manual. Religious books talk about religion. They talk about spirituality, the inner journey. They do not talk about those other things. Those other things crop up sometimes, but that's not the central thrust of those types of books. Therefore, when with respect to Von Daniken, when he's talking about Ezekiel's wheels within wheels, that simply isn't what the text is talking about. And there are commentaries on those texts that were actually written by the rabbis at the time. So, everyone has a fair idea what they're talking about. That's not to say there are no places in Scripture which I think are clearly to do with UFOs. Most of the outbursts of the uncanny in Scripture are supernatural, not paranormal. Therefore, this is one of those weird texts that ticks every box. It begins with those who fly above. What on earth is that? Therefore, they're an angelic group of some sort who descend to the earth, and they want something forbidden. They want relations, carnal and otherwise, with the daughters of men. So I'm not, you're already in the realms of mystery and your realms of metaphor, so it's difficult for me to go much further. But certainly the offspring of this forbidden union are the Nephilim. And the Nephilim are seen as sometimes very beautiful, sometimes hideously ugly, sometimes like giants that are the enemies of the human race. And they want nothing but our destruction. And they want, they eat us, They are meant to be preserved in the legends of giantism across the world. Every culture speaks of giants. Theosophy speaks of giants. I think Madame Blavatsky does an incredibly interesting job. Anthroposophy, Rudolf Steiner, they allude to it, very, very interesting. But, so you're looking at supernatural beings that cause a paranormal phenomena. Certainly, Jim would say that, the biblical flood is linked in to basically a pollution in the human gene pool. And it was designed to rid the human race of that particular problem. I mean, I don't want to go down that route myself because it raises too many other issues, but certainly that is a view. But certainly the Nephilim also turn up after the flood as well, which is another problem with it. All of the Nephilim that died during the flood were, of course, became disembodied spirits, which Jim would say, which my evangelical brothers and sisters tend to say, are what we would call demons nowadays. An angel is an angel, an incredibly powerful being, and those that fly above are now imprisoned, according to some, in Tartarus, which is as far below Hades as the earth is above, below heaven. Terrifying by the sound of it. But you don't lose angelic attributes until judgment, if you're looking at all these things properly. They haven't been judged yet. Whereas the Nephilim have been judged. And, it's the cycle of these demonic spirits trying to come back into our history and pollute it yet again, and then being exorcised by the church or the culture in question, the shaman, the local holy man being exorcised and expelled back into the realms of darkness, into the realms of Hades, and always looking to try and come back and disturb the people around, disturb the people involved in that summoning and around them. So what we're trying to do in the Nephilim Anthropology Conference is get together every single view, including people that don't go for any of it, to talk together, to interact with our audiences. And can we shed any further light on this absolutely fascinating experience? Yes, we can, and we're just about to do it, not in person with our guests, with our audiences, but also as an online newsletter after October. So, right heavens above, I only just thought of that. Were all these weird things in the past propelling me in this direction? Maybe they were, Nick, who knows?
Wonderful. What I'll do is I'll put links to the conference in the show notes below.
Thank you, Nick. The main reason I brought this conference back was because we needed to think of some fundraisers, and I wasn't expecting it to take up in the way it has. I mean, certainly, and we're also working with the Zohar Entertainment Group. I mean, they recently put on one of their channels, Ancient Secret Discoveries, some of our speakers. I mean, they called the selection of speakers that they chose Nephilim and Giants, Holy Earth, and Missing Holy Relics. I mean, to date, it has 478K views. So it's a subject that interests people. And as I say, we didn't tell them what speakers from our panel they should take. We sent them some footage actually from the online version of the conference last April, and they made their own choices. There's certainly proved to be an interest. I mean, my view is it will continue to be a fundraiser, but because we need that income as a church, we're struggling to survive. We're seriously on the ropes. But also, we've touched a nerve. History is not what it seems to be, and that's not to disparage mainline historians who I think overall are doing an absolutely great job with the documents. I mean, can you prove somebody existed 5 years previously, let alone 1,000 years previously? So, I think they're doing a great job with circumstantial evidence, documents. You start going back to a certain point and how many papyri are there to say anything? So I'm not having a go at academic historians. I do think they need to be a little wider in their views, and I think most of them think that as well. But we then have to be realistic about government funding. Is any government going to start giving money for this type of research? It's highly unlikely. I mean, how would they benefit directly in the modern world? So we're keeping going. I mean, I think what we're going to do is actually turn this into an academic panel. So next year, which I'm already beginning to think of, we'll have an expanded panel again. We want more speakers. I will also I want to build a community, not simply a panel of experts, whereby we're all looking together at some of the most fascinating stories in human history. And yet again, my attitude to the balls of light. What does it all mean, and can we get further into this mystery? Will it, does it, and should it interact with us? And I think we're on the verge of actually making this quite a successful little undertaking.
That's wonderful. Okay.
Oh, it's been a blast. Thank you for having me on your show.
Pastor Parry, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing that for our listeners.
Well, I hope you've had, an interesting time.
Wonderful.
You take care, Nick.
Okay, you take care of yourself. Keep in contact.
Thanks, Nick.
All right, and then...
Have a wonderful evening.
Yeah, and you don't work too hard in front of your congregation tonight.
Well, I think if you become clergy, you give up the idea of weekends and too much time to yourself. But that I wouldn't have it any other way. So anyway, God bless you. God bless you.
Take care of yourself, and I'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
That is all for this week. Keep updated and connected with the show on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you have an encounter you'd like to share on the podcast, you can email me at ufochronicles@gmail.com or reach out to me via the contact page on my website at ufochroniclespodcast.com. A big thank you to Francesca and Pastor David Parry for sharing tonight, and thank you all for listening. I will be back next week. Till then, stay safe and keep watching the skies. Goodbye.